Could I have some water? Thank you. I think after this we should try the drop.
Okay. So May 6 marks the 6-year anniversary of my Witch Kitsch hanging lecture, and I'd like to share my thoughts on how it came to be, how it was filmed, and the predicted backlash that occurred. Let's first start by giving a little backstory. I was born and raised in Salem's historic district. History, specifically Salem history, was very important to my family. I witnessed firsthand the growth of Salem's tourist industry. Every year I saw haunted happenings grow from a weekend-long event to a week to the entire month. When I was a junior at RISD, my father led the opposition against the proposed Samantha Stevens statue. His quote, made during a public hearing, went absolutely viral in an age pre-Twitter, and on the day of the unveiling, he and his friends made signs and protested the statue. This clearly made an impact on me. As I grew older and Salem's Witch Kitsch tourist industry got crazier and crazier, I began to realize how right they were. I first got the idea to reenact a witch hanging when I was 25. The earliest note I could find about it was dated September 30th, 2009, and reads, quote, "Recreate the Salem witch trials, 19 a year, extremely serious reenactments, like Gettysburg, on the date they died, extremely, extremely realistic." In July of the next year, I wrote a more formal proposal, but the idea was so big I had no idea how to actually do it. So I put it on the back burner, and in 2013, switched my focus to making satirical souvenirs instead, which I sold in a fake shop called Witch Kitsch that mocked all the stores downtown. In 2017, it happened to be the 325th anniversary of Bridget Bishop's execution. I felt that if I was ever going to go forward with a reenactment, now was the time to do it. So I started reading everything I could on the executions, trying to find answers for the smallest of things. How high were the ladders? How thick was the rope? Were their hands tied in the front or the back? I was also reading everything I could on Bridget Bishop, how old she was, how rich she was, what she would have worn. I even scheduled a time to see and hold her very death worn, which is a very, very powerful moment for me. Once I felt that I understood how an execution would have occurred in 1692, I started preparing for it. I started calling farms in New England in the hopes of renting oxen. I looked into buying Puritan outfits, ladders, hiring an actress, and getting the permits needed. Keep in mind that I had absolutely no money at this time. For help, I applied to 3 different performance-based grants: the Mellon Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts, and Foundation for Contemporary Arts. All of them rejected my proposal. I realized that no art organization would ever endorse such a controversial concept, so the only other avenue I had was a GoFundMe campaign, and I started writing a script that explained my idea. At some point, it also dawned on me that the chances of getting permission from the city to conduct a live hanging on Gallows Hill was pretty slim, so I decided to just hang myself. I figured that if the reenactment never went through, at least I would be showing a version of the hanging. After about 5 months of endless revisions, the script was finally complete. I decided to break my lecture into 2 parts. The first explained how Salem had commercialized the tragedy. The second described the events leading to Gallows Hill, followed by a demonstration of the actual hanging. Given the potential dangers, I needed to hire a professional. I happened to be dating a girl at the time whose roommate was a stunt double, and because of her, she introduced me to a stunt coordinator who had actual experience with fake hangings for movies and plays. For the location, it was very important that the lecture take place in Salem, although given the complications involved, I decided not to do it in front of a live audience. I considered the Morse Auditorium at the PEM, but preferred the Salem Visitor Center, which had a low, panoramic screen that allowed for 3 slides at a time to be shown. Unfortunately, because it was a government building, I would never be allowed to hang myself, so I needed to find a second location. Thank God for SATV. Ever since I was a little kid, me and my brothers had been making movies and TV shows there, and I had good relationships with those in charge. After explaining my idea, they were cool with it. When it came to building the gallows, the only instructions I could find online was from someone who made one for a haunted house, so using that, I mocked up a 3D model and started building. Once all the parts were cut and screwed together, I drove everything to SATV and assembled the entire gallows in the studio. I still had no idea if it would even support my own weight, so I wrapped a rope around the top and hoisted myself up. To my relief, it held. Everything was now ready to record. May 6 was the day of the shoot. I met the stunt coordinator early in the morning and demonstrated how the gallows would hold my own weight. Unfortunately, he explained that I hadn't taken into account my drop weight, which increases dramatically when accelerating towards the ground. He was less worried about my neck snapping and more worried about the gallows collapsing on top of me. He recommended a brace for the other side, so I quickly ran to Home Depot and got another 4x4. That's why if you look on the video, you'll notice that one side is very securely built, while the other is literally just a beam going to the ground. I was then strapped into a full body harness, which was basically like a corset that wrapped all the way down to your feet. We first shot the footage of me continuing the lecture while suspended. This was my favorite portion of the whole lecture. I love the idea of me continuing speaking while hanging from a noose. I don't think anyone's ever done that during a TED Talk. I wanted to save the drops for the very end in case something went wrong. In total, I did 9 drops, only 2 of which were usable. Even though there was a stunt coordinator present, each time I kicked over the ladder was really scary. I had no idea if the gallows would hold my weight, and looking back on the footage, you can see how much the wood buckles every time I dropped. After the 9th drop, I felt like I was pushing my luck and decided to stop. I then headed over to the visitor center, which I had reserved from 6 to 9 p.m. The guy in charge let me in and helped me project the slides, and then left. I pressed record on the camera, walked to the front of the stage, and started talking. By the time I got home at night, I was absolutely exhausted. Up until this point, I had no idea if any of the footage was focused or if the audio was recording. I just crossed my fingers and pressed play to see what I had. To my luck, everything was captured perfectly. It was now time to post it online and see people's reaction. After editing the footage together, I initially posted the video to GoFundMe, but it didn't go viral until someone posted a link to this Facebook group called Keep It Classy Salem. That's when the backlash started. It was really fun reading all the comments, none of which addressed the points I had made during the lecture. Typical of the Keep It Classy mob, they instead resorted to petty insults, bad-mouthing my past art series, and attacking my character, or even my father's character, who had no knowledge that I was even planning this whole thing. A few people accused me of trying to make money off this idea, which was absurd. I mean, I had spent about $2,000 of my own money just renting the visitor center, building the gallows, paying stunt coordinator fees, buying SD cards and other audio equipment, not to mention all the time it took putting this together, all because I believed in the idea so much. I made it a point not to engage directly with any of them. Whenever I put my art out into the world, I love observing from a distance people's reaction to it. I did, however, write a letter to the editor, which was published in the Salem News on May 26. I found it so interesting that all these people were offended at simply showing the reality of history, and yet none of them seemed to be offended by everyone in Salem who completely makes light of this sensitive subject, as well as profits off the victims' deaths. To me, what they're doing is far, far more insensitive, and if people really cared about defending the honor of those who died, they would come out against the witch kitsch. Are they that shocked by witnessing one death? How is it different from seeing thousands of people slaughtered at the Gettysburg reenactment, or seeing people die at the Battle of Lexington, the shootout at the OK Corral, the Battle of Waterloo in Belgium, the medieval Battle of Grunwald, or watching Julius Caesar's assassination, which takes place every year in Rome in front of hundreds of tourists? There's even a reenactment of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, with actual nails being driven through the hands and feet, which takes place on Good Friday in the Philippines. I don't think people considered the intent behind the reenactment. They just saw the surface horror of it all, which was exactly what I was trying to do since the initial concept. The reenactment was being done to remind people of how horrific a hanging execution really was, to show the very seed that Salem's tourist industry grew from, because I feel everyone has forgotten what actually happened. It is this intent that makes the reenactment art opposed to exploitation. And like any powerful artistic statement, it forced people to confront the issue head-on, while also putting them in a catch-22. They couldn't condemn the reenactment while also condoning the tourist industry. If anyone said that I was disrespecting the victims of 1692, they also had to admit that Salem's witch kitsch tourist industry was doing the same, or their argument had no credibility. Despite the backlash, I still stand by this idea 100%. And at some point in my life, I do intend to hold a reenactment at Gallows Hill the way I intended. I'm enormously proud of the lecture. To me, it remains an incredible piece of performance art and activism, something that was thought-provoking and challenged the status quo. And as Salem's tourist industry continues to exploit the victims of 1692, this reenactment only grows in relevancy.